Hey guys, tonight we step quietly onto the open plains as the sun sinks low and the temperature drops faster than your phone battery in winter. You're standing there in the fading light, boots crunching on dry grass, the horizon stretching so wide it almost feels like it's watching you back. A tipi rises ahead of you, calm and still, its hide surface already catching the cold. The wind slides across the land, testing you, slipping under your sleeves, and you realize pretty quickly that if you mess this up, you probably won't survive this night in any kind of comfortable way. No dramatic music, no heroic montage, just you, the cold, and a very long evening ahead. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, feel free to drop a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step closer to the tipi, and the first thing you notice is how ordinary it looks. No thick stone walls, no roaring furnace, just poles, hides, and quiet confidence. This is where you're sleeping tonight, and despite everything modern life has taught you about central heating, people managed this for centuries without waking up as human popsicles. The air smells faintly of smoke and leather, a combination that feels oddly grounding, like stepping into a different rhythm of time. As the last light fades, you feel the cold settle in layers. The ground gives up its daytime warmth almost immediately, and the breeze sharpens. This is where your instincts start whispering unhelpful thoughts like, "Are you sure this is a good idea?" But you're not panicking. The people who lived this way understood cold deeply, the way you understand traffic patterns or which grocery aisle has the shortest line. Sleeping in a tipi wasn't a novelty, it was routine. You duck inside, and the temperature changes almost instantly. Not warm exactly, but calmer. The wind stops bullying you. The space feels smaller, intentional. This is your first mainstream historical fact sliding in quiet link plains. Tribes like the Lakota, Cheyenne, and Blackfoot designed Tipis specifically for harsh weather, especially cold nights. This wasn't guesswork. The design evolved over generations, refined by people who absolutely did not have the option of just going inside. The fire pit sits at the center, dark for now, waiting. You notice how the interior feels less drafty than expected, and that's not an accident. The shape funnels air upward, a detail that looks simple but works beautifully. Historians still argue whether the original inspiration for the conical shape came from purely practical needs or carried symbolic meaning tied to the sky and spiritual balance. Either way, tonight, you're mostly concerned with your toes. As you settle your weight, the ground beneath you feels firm, not icy yet, but you know it's plotting against you. Outside, the night fully claims the plains. Stars spill across the sky in a way modern light pollution never allows. You can't help but glance out once more, because part of you still thinks warmth should come from walls and wires. Instead, you're trusting hide, wood, and shared knowledge. Here's a quirky tidbit to chew on as you relax. Some tribes deliberately positioned their tipis so the entrance faced east, not just for spiritual reasons, but because prevailing winds often came from other directions. That meant fewer icy gusts sneaking in at night. It's the kind of detail you'd never notice unless you'd spent enough cold nights learning the hard way. Ancient wind awareness beats your weather app, and it doesn't even need a charger. You shift again, listening. The sounds are soft, fabric moving slightly, distant night animals doing whatever mysterious paperwork they handle after dark. No city sirens, no neighbor's TV bleeding through the wall. Just the land breathing. There's something deeply calming about that, even as the temperature continues its slow descent. You might assume people slept lightly in these conditions, half frozen and miserable, but accounts suggest otherwise. Many slept soundly, wrapped in layers, accustomed to the rhythm of the night. That's another historical fact slipping in under the blanketing. Sleep patterns adapted to environment, and people didn't expect 8 uninterrupted hours the way modern sleep apps insist you should. Night was flexible. Comfort was relative. Of course, there's always debate. Historians still argue whether early winter nights were more restful or more fragmented, especially during extreme cold spells. Some suggest the constant maintenance of fire and flaps led to lighter sleep. Others believe the body adjusted, sinking into deep rest once warmth stabilized. Either way, you're here now. Letting your breathing slow, feeling your shoulders drop. There's a subtle humor in realizing how much effort modern humans put into recreating what's happening naturally around you. You've probably spent money on heated blankets, memory foam, and socks marketed as thermal performance wear. And here you are, impressed by a structure that looks like it could be assembled before dinner. If this were a product review, it would quietly earn 5 stars for surprisingly cozy. As the cold deepens outside, you're no longer fighting it. You're inside the system now, part of a design meant to hold steady while the world chills. The Tipi doesn't battle the night, it negotiates with it. And you, lying there, start to feel that negotiation working in your favor. Your muscles unclench, your thoughts slow. The night stretches ahead, but it no longer feels threatening. It feels manageable, even gentle in its own firm way. The planes rest, the shelter holds, and you begin to understand, just a little, how people slept through winters long before thermostats ever entered the conversation. You let there a little longer, letting your eyes adjust to the dim interior, and that's when it starts to sink in just how misleading this whole setup is. From the outside, the Tipi looks like something a strong breeze could argue with. Thin poles, stretched hide, no bricks, no beams, no sense of permanence. And yet, inside, the air feels steadier, almost collected, like it knows exactly where it's supposed to be. This deceptively simple shape is doing far more work than it lets on. You're inside a cone, and that cone is quietly managing heat in ways that would make a modern HVAC engineer nod respectfully. The mainstream historical fact here is straightforward, but impressive. The conical shape of the teepee allows warm air from the fire to rise naturally, circulate, and then slowly drift downward along the sides before escaping through the smoke hole. It's convection working with gravity, not fighting it. No buttons to press, no manual to ignore. You notice how there aren't any sharp corners where cold air can lurk. Everything slopes upward, guiding warmth like a gentle suggestion rather than a command. You've been in modern houses that feel draftier than this, and that realization lands with a soft, sarcastic thud. Somewhere in the future, someone is arguing with a thermostat while you're lying here thinking. Honestly, this works. The hides themselves play their part. They're not just a single flimsy layer flapping in the breeze. Often, multiple buffalo hides were stitched together, hair side inward, creating a natural insulation layer. That hair traps air, and trapped air is warmth's best friend. This is basic physics, the same principle behind your puffy jacket, just significantly older and way less branded. No logo, but excellent performance. Here's a quirky tidbit that tends to surprise people during especially cold periods. An additional inner lining, sometimes called a dew cloth, could be hung inside the tipi. This created a secondary wall that trapped even more warm air and prevented condensation from dripping onto sleepers. That's right, condensation management. In the plains, centuries ago, you suddenly feel very judged by your foggy bathroom mirror at home. As you breathe in, the air feels dry but not harsh. Smoke from the fire, when it's lit, doesn't hang around at face level. Instead, it drifts upward, obediently following the shape of the structure. This isn't accidental. The smoke hole at the top, combined with adjustable flaps, acts like a chimney that can be fine-tuned depending on wind direction. You're essentially lying inside a structure that can breathe. Historians still argue whether the earliest versions of Tipis were this efficient, or if these features developed gradually as tribes refined the design over generations. Some suggest earlier shelters were simpler and less forgiving, while others believe the knowledge arrived fully formed through long experimentation long before written records. Either way, you're benefiting from the final draft, not the rough sketch. You shift slightly, testing the air. It's cooler near the ground, warmer higher up, but not dramatically so. That gradient matters. It means the heat isn't racing straight out the top like a bad secret. Instead, it lingers, circulates, and shares itself evenly. You feel like you're inside a slow-moving thermal hug, which is not a phrase you expected to think tonight, but here you are. There's also something psychologically comforting about the shape. The walls curve inward, you creating a sense of enclosure without claustrophobia. You're protected, but not boxed in. Some scholars suggest this had an impact on sleep quality, creating a feeling of safety that allowed deeper rest. Others argue that comfort came more from routine than architecture. Historians still argue whether the sense of security was structural or cultural. You, however, are just glad the wind can't get to you anymore. You can't help but smirk at how this structure balances mobility and comfort. Tipis were designed to be taken down and moved, yet they didn't sacrifice warmth for portability. It's like having a tiny, efficient cabin that politely agrees to relocate when necessary. Modern camping gear tries very hard to achieve this balance and often ends up either heavy or disappointing. This manages both quietly, without a marketing campaign. Another small but important detail: the poles themselves contribute to stability and insulation. They're arranged in a way that creates tension, pulling the hides tight so there's less flapping and fewer gaps. A loose cover equals cold air sneaking in, and nobody wants that at 2 in the morning. Tight. Well-placed hides mean fewer drafts and less heat loss. It's simple, but it requires attention and experience. You imagine someone adjusting the structure earlier in the evening, checking the tension, aligning the entrance, making sure everything is just right before nightfall. These weren't last-minute decisions. Cold punished laziness quickly, and design choices mattered. There's a gentle discipline here, a quiet respect for preparation that feels very different from setting an alarm and hoping for the best. As you settle back, you realize the teepee doesn't try to overpower the environment. It works with it. Wind passes over and around. Heat rises and falls. Nothing is sealed airtight, and that's the point. The balance keeps the interior livable, breathable, and calm. You're not cut off from the world. You're buffered. You let that thought drift as your breathing slows. The structure above you holds steady, doing its quiet work. From the outside, it may look simple, even fragile. From the inside, it feels intentional, practiced, and surprisingly kind. The kind of design that doesn't need to impress you loudly, because it knows it will still be doing its job long after you've fallen asleep. You're still lying there, appreciating the way the tipi holds the night at a respectful distance, when it dawns on you that none of this would matter if the shelter were in the wrong place. You could have the most perfectly engineered structure imaginable, but set it in the path of an icy wind or on damp ground, and your night would turn miserable very quickly. Long before you ever ducked inside, the real work of sleeping warm already happened outside. You imagine yourself earlier in the day, walking the land slowly, not scrolling, not rushing, just paying attention. This is where campsite selection comes in, and it's one of those unglamorous skills that decides everything. A mainstream historical fact slides in here. Plains tribes were meticulous about where they placed their tipis, choosing spots that offered natural windbreaks, proper drainage, and access to resources. This wasn't casual camping. It was strategic comfort. You look around in your mind's eye. The ideal spot isn't at the very top of a hill where the wind can show off, nor is it in a low depression where cold air pools like a grudge. Instead, it's often partway down a slope, where the ground sheds water and the breeze glides overhead rather than slamming directly into you. Cold air is heavy, and it sinks. People learn that by feeling it in their bones, night after night. There's a quiet humor in realizing how much effort went into avoiding a bad draft. You've probably rearranged your bed at home because the vent feels weird. And here entire communities plan their sleeping arrangements around invisible currents of air. Wind was treated like an opinionated neighbor. You couldn't get rid of it, but you could avoid giving it direct access. Quirky tidbit time in some regions. People would test potential campsite spots by observing where frost lingered longest in the morning. Areas that stayed frosty were avoided for winter camps, because that meant cold air settled there overnight. No thermometer required, just patience and observation. It's the kind of low-tech wisdom that feels almost unfairly effective. The ground itself matters just as much as the air. You never place a tipi directly on wet soil if you can help it. Dampness steals heat faster than dry cold ever will. Even in freezing temperatures, moisture is the real villain. You can layer against cold, but wet seeps in and refuses to leave. So sites were chosen with drainage in mind, often on slightly raised ground where snowmelt and rain could move away instead of pooling underneath you. Historians still argue whether these site selection practices were universally consistent across all plains tribes or varied significantly by region and tradition. Some suggest there were shared principles passed along through generations, while others believe each group developed its own nuanced rules based on local geography. Either way, the underlying goal was the same: wake up functional, not frozen. You imagine the entrance of the tipi, usually facing east. Part of that choice ties into spiritual beliefs and greeting the morning sun, but there's also a practical angle. Facing east often meant the entrance was turned away from prevailing westerly winds in many regions. Less wind entering means less cold air barging in while you're trying to sleep. Spiritual symbolism and practical engineering happily sharing the same decision. As night deepens, you appreciate how the land itself becomes part of the insulation system. Trees, ridges, and even other typists can act as buffers. Camps weren't scattered randomly. They were arranged thoughtfully, with shared shelter in mind. Sleeping warm wasn't an individual project, it was communal. If one tipi was exposed, it could affect others nearby, especially in harsh weather. There's something deeply calming about that interdependence. You're not battling the elements alone. You're part of a group that understands the landscape and respects it enough to work with it. That mindset seeps into your body, loosening the constant modern urge to control everything. Here, You adapt instead. Another subtle detail, snow itself could become an ally. In winter, snow piled naturally around the base of a tipi could act as additional insulation, blocking drafts at ground level. It wasn't always cleared away immediately. People recognized when leaving it in place helped more than it hurt. Snow, usually your enemy, quietly switching sides. You shift again, feeling the stable ground beneath you. No soggy patches, no creeping chill, just firmness and dryness. That's not luck, that's planning. You start to understand that warmth begins long before bedding, fire, or hides come into play. It begins with reading the land correctly. The wind outside picks up slightly, but you barely notice it now. It slides over the campsite, redirected, softened by terrain choices made earlier in the day. The Tipi doesn't shake or protest. It simply remains, doing what it was designed to do, helped by the wisdom of where it stands. You let that thought settle. Sleeping here isn't about brute force warmth. It's about alignment. Placing yourself where the night has less to push against you. And as your breathing slows, you realize how much rest comes from not fighting everything all the time. You settle deeper into your spot, and now your attention drifts to what's wrapped around you, because the real stars of this whole operation aren't the poles or even the fire. It's the hides. Thick, heavy, quietly impressive buffalo hides that don't look like much until you realize they're doing the job of several modern layers all at once. This is where the warmth really comes from, and it's doing so without any synthetic fibers or instruction labels. You run your hand across the surface, feeling the dense texture, the slight univeness where hair still clings. These hides were tanned carefully, often with the hair left on for winter use. That hair traps air, and trapped air is insulation. This is your mainstream historical fact for the momenting. Buffalo hides were the primary insulating material for plains tribes, used not only for tipi covers but also for bedding, clothing, and windbreaks. One animal provided warmth in multiple forms, nothing wasted. You're essentially wrapped in an ancient, all-natural sleeping system that modern outdoor brands would absolutely try to sell you for an unreasonable amount of money. And yet here, it's just normal. Expected. The hides are heavy enough to press gently against you, seeing in warmth, but not so stiff that you can't shift comfortably. It's like being tucked in by history itself, which sounds dramatic, but feels surprisingly practical. Here's a quirky tidbit that tends to get overlooked. Buffalo hides used in winter were often thicker and heavier than those used in warmer months, and families rotated them seasonally. Lighter hides for summer, heavier ones for winter. Seasonal bedding swaps existed long before your closet debates about, is it still sweater weather? You smile at that thought as you adjust the hide around your shoulders. The hides beneath you matter just as much as the ones on top. You're not lying directly on the cold ground. Multiple layers are spread out. Hides, woven mats, sometimes grasses, all working together to keep your body heat from being siphoned away by the earth. Ground cold is relentless. It doesn't care how tough you think you are. Insulation underneath you is non-negotiable, and people knew this intimately. Historians still argue whether buffalo hides alone were sufficient in the coldest conditions or if additional materials were always required during extreme winters. Some accounts suggest layers upon layers were used, while others imply that experienced sleepers relied more on body positioning and shared warmth. The truth likely shifts depending on weather, region, and resources, but the hides remain central to every version of the story. You notice how the smell of the hides is earthy, not unpleasant, just present. It reminds you that warmth comes from living systems, not machines. There's something grounding about that, even as you joke internally that you'd still miss heated floors if given the choice. Comfort is contextual, after all. The hides covering the tipi itself add another layer of protection. When stretched tightly over the poles, they block wind and trap heat. Gaps are carefully avoided. Seams are positioned to minimize drafts. Maintenance matters. A loose hide can turn a cozy night into a very long one, so people checked, adjusted, and repaired constantly. Sleeping warm required effort, but it was the kind of effort that paid off every night. Another small but fascinating detail, hides were sometimes treated with oils or fats that improved water resistance and flexibility in cold temperatures. This prevented them from stiffening too much when frozen, which would otherwise create gaps and reduce insulation. It's the kind of quiet technological tweak that never makes it into textbooks but makes all the difference at 2 a.m. You shift slightly, feeling the hides move with you rather than against you. They're broken in, shaped by use. New hides were stiffer, less forgiving. There was a learning curve, even in sleeping. Experience softened both the material and the people using it. Comfort was something you earned over time, not something you ordered online. There's a general joke to be made here about how your modern blanket collection probably includes 3 options, and none of them can survive a snowstorm. Meanwhile, one buffalo hide is out here pulling double shifts as blanket, mattress, and emotional support object. Minimalism, but make it functional. As the night deepens, you feel the hides holding your warmth close. The air inside the tipi remains calm, not hot, not cold, just steady. That steadiness is everything. Extreme warmth isn't the goal, consistency is. Your body relaxes when it doesn't have to keep reacting. Historians still argue whether the psychological comfort of these familiar materials contributed as much to warmth as their physical properties. Some suggest that feeling secure and wrapped in known textures help people sleep more deeply, conserving energy. Others argue that insulation alone explains it. You suspect it's both. Mind and body rarely operate separately, especially at night. You let your breathing slow, matching the quiet rhythm of the space. The hides don't rustle much. They absorb sound, creating a muffled, peaceful interior. Outside, the wind can do whatever it wants. In here, the world feels smaller, softer. As you drift closer to sleep, you realize that these hides aren't just keeping you warm. They're teaching you something about patience, preparation, and respect for materials that do their job without asking for praise. And wrapped in that quiet competence, you feel yourself settling in, ready for the long, cold night to pass gently around you. You're warm enough now that the thought of fire drifts back into your mind, not as a desperate need, but as a steady companion. The fire pit sits there in the center of the tipi, a dark circle waiting patiently. Fire, you realize, isn't about blasting heat in this space. It's about balance. Too much and you'll roast. Too little, and the night starts creeping in again, inch by inch. You imagine the fire being lit earlier, carefully with small, controlled flames. This is your mainstream historical fact for the moment. Indoor fires were commonly used inside Tipis, even during winter, and people developed precise methods to manage them safely and efficiently. The goal was warmth and light, not a dramatic bonfire. Fire was treated like a tool, not entertainment. The placement of the fire pit matters more than you'd expect. Centered beneath the smoke hole, it allows heat to rise evenly while guiding smoke upward. You don't get that stinging, eye-watering haze you might be picturing. Instead, smoke lifts gently, following the shape of the tipi like it knows the rules. You breathe easily, which feels like a small miracle if you've ever sat too close to a badly placed campfire. Here's a quirky tidbit that tends to surprise people. Some fires were deliberately kept very low at night, sometimes little more than glowing embers. Embers provide steady heat without producing much smoke, making them ideal for sleeping hours. It's less campfire stories and more ancient radiant heating, quiet, dependable, and not trying to impress anyone. You listen in your imagination to the faint crackle, the soft pop of wood settling. The sound is rhythmic, almost hypnotic. It becomes part of the night's background noise, like the fan you might use at home, only with a bit more personality. You find yourself smiling at the thought that humans have been falling asleep to this sound for thousands of years, long before white noise playlists existed. Managing smoke is a skill, and the smoke flaps at the top of the tipi play a starring role. These adjustable flaps can be opened or closed depending on wind direction, drawing smoke out efficiently. You picture someone waking briefly in the night, adjusting them slightly, then settling back down. It's a quiet dance with the elements, performed half asleep. Historians still argue whether long-term exposure to smoke inside Tipis caused significant health issues or if the ventilation systems were effective enough to minimize harm. Some evidence suggests respiratory problems may have occurred, while other research points to well-managed fires producing surprisingly clean air. The truth likely depends on fire size, fuel type, and how attentive people were. Tonight, at least, the air feels breathable. You shift again, feeling the gentle warmth radiating outward. Fire heats objects, not just air. The ground nearby warms slightly, the hides soak in heat and release it slowly. It's a layered effect, not a blast furnace. Modern heating systems often cycle on and off aggressively. This is steady, the patient warmth, the kind that doesn't wake you up by being too enthusiastic. There's a subtle humor in how carefully controlled this all is. You'd think fire equals chaos, but here it's practically meditative. Someone long ago figured out that a small fire beats a large one when sleep is the goal. Bigger flames mean more smoke, more tending, more interruptions. Smaller flames mean longer rest. Practical wisdom wins again. Another small detail: the type of wood mattered. Certain woods burned hotter or smokier than others. People learned which fuels were best for nighttime use, favoring those that produced steady heat and minimal smoke. This knowledge was passed down casually, not written, learned by watching and doing. Fire education was just part of growing up. You imagine the fire dimming as the night deepens, not because it's neglected, but because it's been planned that way. The goal isn't to stay awake feeding it. The goal is to let it support sleep, not dominate it. That shift in mindset feels refreshing. You don't need everything turned up to 11 to feel secure. Historians still argue whether some winter nights were spent without any fire at all, relying solely on insulation and body heat. Some accounts suggest this happened during extreme fuel shortages or particularly calm nights. Others believe a small fire was almost always maintained. Either way, the flexibility is key. Fire is a helper, not a requirement. As you lie there, the glow softens shadows on the hides above you. The light flickers gently, never harsh. Your eyelids grow heavier. The fire's warmth seeps into your muscles, loosening the last bits of tension you didn't realize you were holding. You breathe in slowly, then out. The fire crackles once, then settles. Outside, the cold holds its ground, but inside, you're bound, overbalanced, not overheated, chilled, just comfortably present, and as sleep edges closer, you realize that mastering fire wasn't about conquering it. It was about listening to it, the same way you're listening now, letting it fade into the background as rest takes over. Sometime after the fire has settled into its quiet rhythm, you become aware of a soft movement above you, a barely audible shift in the hide. It's the smoke flaps, and they're doing more than just letting smoke escape. They're adjusting the entire atmosphere of the Tipi, minute by minute, like an ancient form of climate control that never fully turns off. You don't see it happening, but you feel the results. The smoke flaps sit near the top of the Tipi, two triangular extensions that can be angled inward or outward. This is your mainstream historical fact for this stretch of the night. Smoke flaps were a standard feature of Tipis, designed to regulate airflow, heat retention, and smoke ventilation. They weren't decorative. They were essential, and knowing how to use them was part of everyday life. You imagine someone earlier checking the wind direction, adjusting the flaps accordingly. When the wind shifts, the flaps shift too, sometimes multiple times during the night. It's not a dramatic process. No alarms. Just a quiet awareness that the air has changed slightly, and a small correction is needed. You're reminded of adjusting a blanket when the room cools, only this adjustment affects everyone inside. Here's a quirky tidbit that tends to surprise people. Smoke flaps weren't always symmetrical. Depending on wind direction, one flap might be opened wider than the other, creating a gentle draft that pulled smoke upward without dragging cold air down onto the sleepers. It's asymmetric design doing very symmetric work. You smile at how much nuance exists in something that looks so simple from the outside. The effect is subtle but powerful. Warm air rises, smoke follows, and fresh air sneaks in near the bottom, usually along the sides where the hides meet the ground. But because the ground is insulated and the air movement is slow, that incoming air doesn't feel like a cold slap. It's more like a quiet refresh, keeping the interior breathable without stealing warmth. Historians still argue whether people adjusted smoke flaps throughout the night or set them once and trusted the system. Some accounts suggest frequent micro-adjustments, especially during windy conditions. Others imply that experienced builders could predict overnight changes well enough to set the flaps and sleep through. The truth likely sits somewhere in between, depending on weather and experience. You notice how the air inside the teepee never feels stale. That's no small achievement in a closed space with a fire. Modern buildings often struggle with this balance, sealing themselves so tightly that air quality suffers. Here, the structure breathes. It inhales and exhales slowly, matching the rhythm of the night. There's a gentle joke in realizing that this setup accomplishes what countless smart thermostats attempt without Wi-Fi or updates. No blinking lights, no app notifications, just fabric wood and awareness. If it breaks, you can see it. If it shifts, you can feel it. Maintenance is intuitive, not outsourced. Another small but important detail: the poles themselves help guide airflow. Their arrangement creates channels where warm air can move upward efficiently. It's not just the flaps doing the work, it's the entire structure collaborating. You're lying inside a system, not just a shelter. As the night progresses, the temperature outside dips further, but the interior remains stable. That's partly because of the way the smoke flaps limit how quickly warm air escapes. They're not wide open unless they need to be. Heat loss is controlled, intentional. Nothing is wasted. You imagine a brief moment of wakefulness, someone reaching up with a pole to nudge a flap slightly. No urgency, no frustration, just a practiced motion, then back to sleep. Nighttime adjustments are part of the rhythm, not interruptions. The night isn't something to power through. It's something to move with. Historians still argue whether this constant interaction with the shelter affected sleep depth. Some suggest lighter, more responsive sleep patterns were common. Others argue that familiarity made these adjustments almost subconscious, barely disrupting rest. You suspect it's like living near a train track. You notice it at first, then eventually, you don't. The air feels good in your lungs, not cold, not smoky, just right. Your breathing slows, sensing with the gentle movement of air around you. It's easy to forget that outside, the world is sharp and cold. Inside, everything is rounded, softened by layers of intention. You settle deeper, appreciating how much thought went into these details. Smoke flaps might not sound exciting, but they're doing heroic work quietly, all night long. They don't demand attention. They simply respond over and over, keeping the space livable. As your thoughts drift, you realize that warmth here isn't about sealing yourself off completely. It's about controlled connection, letting just enough of the outside in and sending just enough of the inside out. That balance, once achieved, feels effortless. And wrapped in that steady exchange, you slide closer to sleep, trusting the structure above you to keep breathing on your behalf. At some point in the night, when everything else feels steady, the fire calm, the air balanced, the hides doing their quiet work, you become aware of the ground beneath you. Not because it's cold, thankfully, but because you remember how cold it could be. The earth is patient like that. It doesn't rush. It just waits, slowly pulling heat away from anything foolish enough to lie directly on it without protection. This is where one of the most important truths of cold, whether sleeping settles in the ground, is the real enemy. Wind is dramatic, fire is obvious, but the ground is sneaky. It steals warmth through direct contact, and it does it relentlessly. The mainstream historical fact here is simple and vital. Native peoples sleeping in Tipis used multiple insulating layers between their bodies and the ground to prevent heat loss, often more than they used on top. You feel those layers now. Beneath you are hides, thick and heavy, sometimes doubled or tripled. Beneath those might be woven mats, reeds, or dried grasses, depending on region and season. Each layer traps air. Each layer slows the transfer of heat. The result is that the cold earth stays politely where it belongs. Below you, not inside your bones. You shift slightly, testing it. No icy shock, no creeping chill. Just firmness and a faint, dull coolness that never quite reaches you. That's intentional. People understood that compression matters. When you lie down, whatever is under you gets flattened, losing some insulating power. So they compensated by adding more layers than you think necessary. Overkill wasn't wasteful, it was wise. Here's a quirky tidbit that often surprises people in some cases. Sleepers deliberately arranged bedding so their hips and shoulders, points of greatest pressure, had extra padding beneath them. They knew exactly where heat loss happened fastest, even if they didn't phrase it in scientific terms. You might call it intuitive ergonomics. They probably just called it not waking up miserable. Historians still argue whether certain materials were preferred primarily for insulation or for comfort. Some suggest woven mats were about keeping hides clean and dry, while others argue they added significant thermal value. The reality, as usual, is probably both. Comfort and warmth tend to travel together, especially when you're trying to sleep through a long winter night. You think about how modern camping advice constantly emphasizes insulation under your sleeping bag, not just on top, foam pads, inflatable mats, layers beneath you. All of that feels very clever until you realize people figured this out centuries ago, without product reviews. Experience was the feedback system, and it was brutally honest. There's a gentle humor in imagining someone ignoring this advice for the first time. One poorly layered night, one stubborn attempt to tough it out, and suddenly you're very motivated to rearrange your bedding. The ground teaches quickly, and it does not care about your pride. It's the original sleep coach, and it's not gentle. Another subtle detail: sleeping positions mattered. Curling slightly reduced surface area in contact with the ground, conserving heat. People didn't always sprawl the way you might on a memory foam mattress. Space was shared, warmth was shared, and efficiency mattered. Comfort wasn't about luxury, it was about sustainability. You notice how the bedding doesn't feel soft in a modern sense. It's supportive, firm, reliable. No sinking, no losing heat into a plush abyss. It holds you up just enough to keep circulation flowing. You don't wake up stiff, because you don't wake up cold. Cold tightens muscles. Warmth lets them relax. The ground, properly managed, becomes neutral instead of hostile. Historians still argue whether raised sleeping surfaces were common across all tribes or only used in certain regions and seasons. Some evidence suggests low platforms or piled bedding created a slight elevation off the ground, especially in colder conditions. Others believe most people slept directly on layered materials. Either way, the goal was the same: reduce contact with cold earth as much as possible. You let your hand slide down to feel the edge of the bedding. It's thick. Reassuringly so. This wasn't thrown together at bedtime. It was prepared deliberately, often well before nightfall. Cold doesn't forgive last-minute decisions. Preparation is part of rest. There's also a communal aspect here. Bedding materials were shared resources maintained collectively. If one person slept poorly, it affected the group. Energy mattered. Strength mattered. Sleep wasn't a private indulgence. It was infrastructure. That thought lingers with you, oddly comforting. You smile faintly at the realization that you've probably underestimated the importance of your mattress at home. You've blamed pillows, room temperature, maybe your phone, but the ground, or whatever substitutes for it, still plays the biggest role. Ancient sleepers knew this instinctively. Modern sleepers rediscover it every time they buy a new bed. The ground beneath the tipi remains still, cold, and patient, but it's been neutralized. It can't reach you through the layers. It can't steal your warmth fast enough to matter. You're insulated, elevated just enough, and supported. As your breathing deepens, you stop noticing the ground at all. That's the real success. When insulation works, it disappears from your awareness. You don't think about it, you just rest, and there, held above the cold earth by thoughtful layers and quiet knowledge, you drift further into sleep, knowing that the most persistent threat of the night has already been handled, long before you ever lay down. As the night continues its slow, unhurried stretch, you begin to notice something subtle about your position inside the tipi. You're not sprawled randomly. You're not just wherever there happened to be space. There's an order to where you're lying, and that order has everything to do with warmth, comfort, and long experience. This is where sleeping platforms and raised beds quietly enter the picture, correcting another modern misconception. You probably imagined everyone sleeping directly on the ground, layered up and hoping for the best. But in many cases, that wasn't the whole story. Here's your mainstream historical fact: some native groups, especially during colder seasons, used slightly raised sleeping platforms or deliberately built up bedding areas to lift sleepers off the coldest ground air. Even a few inches made a noticeable difference. You picture a low platform made from poles laid crosswise, covered with hides and mats. Nothing tall or creaky. Just enough elevation to let cold air settle underneath instead of wrapping around you. Cold air sinks. Warm air rises. That simple truth shapes where you sleep. You're not trying to float. You're just stepping out of the coldest layer of the night. Even when platforms weren't used, bedding was often piled thickly enough to function like one. Layers upon layers created a buffer zone between your body and the ground. It's not about luxury. It's about physics. You can't negotiate with cold air, but you can position yourself above it. Here's a quirky tidbit that often gets overlooked. In some cases, people adjusted sleeping height based on age or vulnerability. Those who felt the cold more sharply, children, elders, or anyone recovering from illness, might sleep slightly higher or with extra layers beneath them. Comfort wasn't one size fits all. It was responsive. Historians still argue how widespread raised platforms truly were across different tribes and regions. Some archaeological evidence suggests platforms were more common in forested or colder areas where materials were abundant. Others argue that in the open plains, thick bedding achieved the same result with less effort. As with most things, the answer likely depends on geography and season. You shift gently, noticing how stable your sleeping surface feels. There's no sagging, no sinking that traps cold air against your body. Everything feels intentional. Your weight is distributed evenly, which helps with circulation. Good circulation keeps you warm. It's another one of those connections that feels obvious once you've experienced it. There's something quietly amusing about how much thought went into where and how people slept. You've probably collapsed onto a couch or bed without much consideration beyond, "This looks fine." Here, sleep is engineered. Not obsessively, but thoughtfully. You don't just lie down. You place yourself. You imagine someone earlier in the evening adjusting the bedding, adding another hide, shifting a mat, checking the firmness. These aren't chores, they're rituals. Preparation signals to the body that rest is coming. That predictability matters, especially in harsh environments. Another subtle benefit of raised or well-layered sleeping surfaces is dryness. Even in winter, condensation and moisture can form where warm bodies meet cold ground. Elevation helps air circulate underneath, reducing dampness. Dry equals warm. Wet equals misery. The equation never changes. Historians still argue whether people recognize moisture as a direct cause of cold-related illness or simply notice the correlation through experience. Either way, they acted on it. Sleeping dry wasn't optional. It was part of staying functional. You let your mind wander briefly to modern camping cots and insulated pads, all designed to solve the same problem. They're marketed as innovations, but they're really rediscoveries. You smile at the idea that somewhere, an ancient sleeper would look at a modern camping store and nod approvingly, then walk past most of it. There's also a social aspect to sleeping arrangements. Platforms or designated bedding areas help define personal space without isolating anyone. You're close enough to share warmth, far enough to rest comfortably. It's a balance modern apartments sometimes struggle with, despite walls and doors. You notice how the air near the floor of the Tipi feels cooler if you reach down. That temperature difference is exactly why elevation matters. You're not immune to the cold, you're just wisely positioned above its strongest reach. The Tipi's design, the bedding, the fire, and your placement all work together. Remove one piece and the system struggles. Historians still argue whether sleeping arrangements shifted significantly during extreme cold snaps. Some accounts suggest people crowded closer, layered higher, and adapted quickly. Others imply that routines stayed largely the same, with only minor adjustments. You suspect flexibility was the real key. No rigid rules, just practical responses. You adjust slightly, finding a position that feels right. Your body settles, muscles relax. There's no pressure point screaming for attention. That, too, helps with warmth. Tension burns energy. Relaxation conserves it. Sleep is fuel economy. There's a gentle joke hiding here. You've probably spent time optimizing your workspace chair or mattress firmness, but ancient sleepers were optimizing survival-level ergonomics without ever calling it that. No labels, no charts, just results. As the night deepens, the raised bedding does its quiet work. Cold air stays low, warmth stays with you. You don't feel perched or exposed. You feel supported, grounded, and secure. Eventually, you stop thinking about how you're sleeping at all, and that's the real success. When the system works, it disappears from your awareness. You're not impressed anymore. You're just resting. And there, slightly lifted above the coldest layer of the world, you drift deeper into sleep, carried not by luxury, but by generations of small, thoughtful decisions that understood one simple truthing: where you sleep matters just as much as how. The next element of warmth and comfort that becomes obvious is the presence of others. You shift slightly and realize you're not alone in the Tipi, and that fact has more impact on your warmth than you might have guessed. Shared body heat is subtle but cumulative. Each additional person becomes a little radiant heater, a living layer that contributes to overall comfort. This is where social arrangement merges with practical survival. Historically, Plains families and small groups slept strategically. There wasn't random sprawled sleeping like on a dorm room floor. You're lying where you are for a reason. This is your mainstream historical fact. Sleeping arrangements were deliberate, often with elders, children, or the most vulnerable position where warmth and accessibility were maximized. Heat distribution was as much about cooperation as insulation. You notice the quiet choreography: people slightly adjust to share warmth, not crowd one another. Arms, legs, and shoulders are positioned with intention, creating small zones of concentrated warmth. You imagine a subtle nudge here, a soft repositioning there, all done without waking anyone fully. That's skill, and a gentle form of nightly intimacy that's practical rather than sentimental. Here's a quirky tidbit: some accounts mention that in extremely cold nights, families would form a rough spiral or circle around the fire pit, minimizing exposure to drafts and maximizing the shared heat. It's not romantic, it's functional. But you can't help but smile at the image. Think of it as cooperative warmth logistics. You would never see a modern floor plan include a warmth spiral, yet it works beautifully here. Historians still argue whether the social arrangement was more dictated by age, status, or purely by thermal efficiency. Some argue that children were prioritized for warmth. Others suggest that elders had the prime spots. Likely, it was a combination, negotiated naturally within families and small groups. Regardless, the effect is the same: everyone gains some measure of warmth from their neighbors. You notice how little movement is required once everyone is in position. Minimal fidgeting preserves heat. Shifting unnecessarily costs energy and disturbs the subtle thermal balance. You've probably been in a bed where tossing and turning actually cools you off, and now you see why structured positioning matters. Ancient sleepers optimized micro-movements for maximum comfort. Another subtle detail: blankets, hides, and mats were often shared or overlapped. One hide might cover two sleepers, distributing warmth more efficiently. There's an economy here that modern sleeping arrangements rarely consider: thermal efficiency over personal space perfection. The social dynamics weren't just about comfort or custom. They were survival-driven. You shift slightly, feeling warmth from a near body radiating just enough to reach your arm. It's not stifling. It's calming. Shared warmth also reduces the need for overly large fires or excessive layering, which conserves fuel and resources. Efficiency in action. It's a reminder that survival often comes dressed in teamwork rather than technology. There's a gentle joke that occurs to Yug. Imagine arguing about who hogs the blanket when your entire livelihood depends on not freezing overnight. Stakes are slightly higher than petty bedroom debates, and somehow, the principles translate. You might chuckle softly in the quiet darkness. It's warmth and humor, coexisting. Historians still argue how strictly these arrangements were enforced. Some suggest flexibility was key, especially for transient camps or mixed-age gatherings. Others propose that norms were surprisingly rigid, with everyone understanding their position without argument. Either way, there's a rhythm to it, a silent understanding, like dancers moving in low light. You notice another detail: proximity to the fire still matters, but it's balanced with shared heat. Those closer to the fire aren't necessarily the ones prioritized. They're more exposed, but the collective arrangement evens it out. Heat isn't monopolized, it's shared. Cooperation matters more than position alone. The night continues, steady and undramatic. Breathing slows, bodies remain aligned, and warmth circulates in subtle waves. The social system quietly enforces comfort, without fuss. It's not rigid, but it's effective. You feel it without thinking, part of the group, even as a visitor. Finally, you realize that this communal warmth does more than just fight the cold. It signals security, encourages deeper sleep, and reassures the mind. Isolation amplifies the perception of cold. Connection mitigates it. Warmth, it seems, is as psychological as it is physical. You exhale slowly, letting the presence of others ease tension in your muscles and your mind. And there, nestled not just in hides but in a subtle network of living heat, you drift further toward rest. The night outside is harsh, indifferent, but inside, the quiet hum of shared warmth and careful positioning makes the cold manageable, even gentle. By now, the night has deepened further, and your thoughts drift toward the next layer of preparationing, clothing. You realize that unlike in modern bedrooms where pajamas and blankets compete for dominance, winter clothing played a vital role in Native American sleep strategy. You probably wouldn't consider wearing your everyday outerwear to bed, but here it's not just acceptable, it's essential. A mainstream historical fact settles in: Plains tribes often slept fully clothed during harsh winters, or at least in extra layers of hides and furs. There's no shame, no fashion police, just practical warmth. Your body is a heat source, and every layer you can preserve keeps that heat close. Thermal efficiency is the quiet hero of the night. You shift slightly, adjusting an imagined layer. Even subtle fabrics like soft deerskin leggings, a fur shirt, or moccasin socks contribute significantly. Combined with hides beneath and above you, your body is almost cocooned in warmth. Modern camping gear tries to replicate this, but it's only recently that insulation technology can match the consistency and adaptability of natural hides and furs. Here's a quirky tidbit. In some accounts, people would leave certain elements of their daytime clothing on deliberately, even if slightly uncomfortable, because removing them actually reduced their thermal protection. You laugh quietly at the idea of leaving on your scarf and boots to go to bed, but the principle makes perfect sense. Comfort in this context is survival. Historians still argue whether everyone wore full daytime outfits at night or if there were designated sleep garments. Some evidence points to both approaches, depending on tribe, weather, and available clothing. It seems practicality dictated choice more than habit. You, lying in the imagined folds of these layers, are grateful for that pragmatic approach. You notice how clothing interacts with bedding. Furs and hides trap air close to the skin, and additional layers enhance this effect. It's a sophisticated, if intuitive, understanding of thermal physics. Positioning, movement, and layering all contribute. The people who slept this way weren't engineers by title, but they were engineers in practice, refining methods over generations. A small, humorous image drifts through your mind, someone accidentally removing too many layers and realizing midnight that their toes have staged a revolt. Lessons learned the hard way, often repeated, quietly passed down. You shift to adjust, almost imagining the corrective movements from generations past, a subtle choreography of warmth. Another detail: some tribes kept extra garments near the fire or entrance, ready to add if the night deepened in cold. Flexibility mattered. No single arrangement was perfect for every night. Preparation included responsiveness, not just layering. Sleep was a dynamic system. The psychological aspect cannot be ignored. Wearing multiple layers creates a cocoon effect, producing both physical warmth and mental reassurance. You feel snug, safe, and oddly empowered. Security in clothing complements insulation, letting your mind relax while your body stays cozy. Sleep is easier when confidence in your warmth is high. Historians still argue how much clothing affected sleep patterns versus bedding arrangements. Some argue body heat alone was sufficient when layered properly. Others suggest combination strategies, clothing plus hides plus positioning, maximized comfort. You suspect both are true, depending on weather and region. You notice how these layers encourage a particular type of stillness. You're less likely to toss and turn because the layers gently hold you in place. Minimal movement preserves warmth. Energy isn't wasted on futile shivering. Efficiency again, quietly enforced by design rather than instruction. Finally, you consider the lightness of mind that comes from being adequately dressed. There's no need to panic about the cold. You're prepared. You're wrapped in layers that centuries of experience have optimized. Your body can finally focus on relaxing instead of defending. Muscles release, shoulders drop, eyelids grow heavy. And so, fully clothed, surrounded by shared warmth, insulated by hides, and positioned thoughtfully, you begin to drift further toward deep sleep. The night outside remains indifferent, but here, inside this carefully created environment, warmth is reliable, comforting, and consistent. You exhale, letting the layers do their quiet, essential work, and feel yourself merge with the steady rhythm of the Tipi. By now, the fire is reduced to a gentle glow, the flaps above adjusted perfectly, and your clothing and bedding layers are doing their steady work. The next piece of the puzzle is the nighttime routine itself, those small pre-sleep habits that prepare the body to rest efficiently in the cold. You probably wouldn't think much about them, but they make all the difference between tossing and turning and sinking into a deep, restorative sleep. Historically, nightly routines among plains tribes were practical and deliberate. This is your mainstream historical fact. Before lying down, people often performed small chores like tending the fire, adjusting bedding, and checking the hides for gaps or moisture. These actions weren't stressful, they were soothing, almost meditative. Each movement signals to your body that it's time to wind down. You stretch slightly, imagining those motions. Even brushing off debris, shifting a hide, or checking a corner of the tipi serves a dual purposing. It physically optimizes your sleep environment while mentally preparing you for rest. Modern science would call this a sleep hygiene ritual. The difference here is that it's intimately tied to survival, so the motivation is stronger and the outcomes more reliable. Here's a quirky tidbit that often surprises people. Some tribes would take a brief moment to rub warmth into their hands and feet using additional furs or heated stones before settling down. It's like a preheated comfort zone. No electric blankets required. Simple, efficient, and surprisingly effective. You might even chuckle at the image of someone gently rolling a warm stone, their toss like a spa treatment. Survival style. Historians still argue whether these pre-sleep practices were universal or highly individualized. Some accounts suggest that routines varied by age, gender, and weather. Others propose that certain habits were passed down through families, almost ritualistically. Either way, consistency mattered. Repetition helped the body anticipate sleep, enhancing rest even in freezing temperatures. You notice that these routines also help regulate the fire's heat. Adjusting embers or flaps ensures that the room isn't too hot or cold once you lie down. It's a delicate balance. The goal is to maintain steady warmth for hours, not to chase a sudden temperature spike. This gentle attention to environmental control is almost ASMR in its quiet rhythm, and it calms the mind as much as the body. Another subtle point, some nighttime preparations involve light stretching or gentle movements. Curling, uncurling, and repositioning muscles helped maintain circulation, preventing the stiffness and numbness that cold can bring. Minimal activity, carefully targeted, maximizes comfort without losing heat. You feel a little smug imagining yourself incorporating these low-effort techniques into a modern bedtime routine. There's also a social component to routines. Before sleep, families might share quiet conversation, recount the day, or tell brief stories. These aren't long epics, but small exchanges that reinforce security and comfort. Knowing everyone is accounted for, and that their warmth and presence are nearby, allows the mind to relax. You've probably experienced something similar in a cozy household, minus the biting cold. Historians still argue whether the narrative aspect of these routines, stories, jokes, reminders, contributed measurably to physical warmth, or if it was purely psychological. Some suggest that the sense of safety provided by familiar voices allowed deeper sleep cycles, reducing shivering and conserving energy. Others maintain that it was incidental. You suspect it's both, a synergy of mind and body. You shift slightly, tucking your arms in, adjusting a hide, and feel the rhythm of these habits settling over you like a blanket of routine. The world outside continues its indifferent dance of temperature and wind. Inside, you are entirely gently attended to. By layers, by neighbors, by design, and by centuries of learned behavior. A gentle joke drifts through your mind. You might call this pre-sleep engineering. But really, it's just practical common sense executed quietly and gracefully. No checklists, no apps, just lived experience. Modern humans could learn a lot from the simplicity and effectiveness of these small, mindful acts. Finally, as you settle fully, muscles relaxed, blankets arranged, clothing in place, you notice how these subtle habits amplify the effectiveness of every other layer of warmth. Ground insulation, shared body heat, raised platforms, hides, fire, and flaps, all now synchronize with your body's own rhythms. The night outside and in feels balanced. And with that, your mind begins to drift. The careful preparation, both physical and mental, allows you to release tension fully. Every habit practiced before lying down now does its work silently, sending you further into the gentle embrace of sleep. As your breathing deepens and the familiar warmth of bedding, clothing, and shared bodies surrounds you, your awareness drifts toward the subtle ambient noises that fill the tipi. Outside, the wind whispers over the plains, occasionally rustling grass or rattling a loose pole. Inside, there's the soft crackle of embers, the slight creak of the structure settling, and the gentle murmur of companions. These sounds form a rhythm, a quiet soundtrack to sleep that's entirely different from the artificial white noise we use today. A mainstream historical fact here on Plains tribes were acutely aware of environmental sounds and their impact on sleep. The gentle crackle of fire, the faint rustle of poles and hides, and even distant animal calls were all signals used to anticipate changes in weather or detect approaching danger. They were both practical and comforting. You lying here feel attuned to it in a way that modern sleepers rarely do. You notice the soft interplay between the Tipis shape and these sounds. The conical walls reflect sound gently, preventing harsh echoes. Noise isn't blocked entirely, but it's modulated. You almost forget that a strong wind is blowing outside because inside, the audio environment feels slow, muted, and strangely calm. It's a kind of acoustic insulation that you probably wouldn't think about, yet it has a direct effect on how deeply you can sleep. Here's a quirky tidbit in some accounts. Sleepers reported that the sound of the wind hitting the smoke flaps or the walls of the Tipi could actually lull them to sleep. The gentle rhythmic swish becomes a natural metronome, a soothing background to the day's ending. Imagine a nature-based lullaby, free and consistent, woven into the structure itself. Historians still argue whether these auditory cues were actively interpreted for survival or if the brain simply adapted to them passively, incorporating them into a subconscious sleep routine. Some scholars suggest that being attuned to every minor noise kept sleepers alert enough to respond to potential dangers without disturbing rest. Others argue that it was primarily comforting, reinforcing a sense of being alive and aware but not threatened. Either way, the effect is subtle and profound. You notice the interplay between sound and smell as well. Smoke rises and drifts, carrying the faint aroma of burned wood, mixed with the earthy scent of hides. This sensory combination, coupled with the gentle ambient noises, creates a holistic environment for rest. It's part atmosphere, part psychological cue. Your brain begins associating the smells and sounds with warmth, safety, and relaxation, creating a perfect sleep-ready environment. Another subtle pointing, the Tipi's interior absorbs sound in a way that enhances privacy. Even if you share the space with several others, conversations and movements are softened, creating a sense of enclosure and calm. You imagine yourself lying in a cocoon of sound, where everything is audible yet non-intrusive. Modern houses with hard surfaces often struggle to replicate this effect. There's a small, humorous thought that drifts through your mind. You'd probably pay for an ambient sound machine that tries to mimic this. Gentle flaps in embers mode. But here it's natural, cost-free, and effortless. No batteries, no loops, just reality doing its subtle work. Historians still argue whether the auditory environment contributed more to survival or comfort. Some suggest the subtle creaks and wind sounds acted as early warning systems, alerting sleepers to shifts in weather or wildlife. Others maintain the primary effect was psychological, creating a sense of continuity and safety that enhanced sleep depth. Likely it was both a perfect example of practical multisensory design. You adjust slightly, nestling further into your hides and blankets, and notice that the soundscape encourages a gentle pacing of your thoughts. Your mind isn't racing. It follows the slow rhythm of wind, fire, and the soft creak of poles. Even your imagination seems to slow, sensing with the environment. The night itself feels intentional, each sound part of the structure's quiet guidance toward rest. And there, surrounded by carefully layered warmth, gentle noises, and the subtle interplay of environment and design, you begin to drift further. The auditory environment, like every other element of this carefully maintained shelter, works quietly and effectively, reinforcing the safety, comfort, and warmth that will carry you through the cold night. As your mind begins to wander even deeper into the night, your awareness drifts to one of the more overlooked elements of sleeping in a typic: ventilation. You might think that being surrounded by heavy hides would make the interior stifling, but the design is surprisingly sophisticated. Air doesn't just sit there, it moves subtly, keeping the interior breathable without stealing heat. It's a quiet miracle of passive design. Here's your mainstream historical fact for this section. Tipis were intentionally ventilated through the adjustable smoke flaps and the natural draft created by their conical shape. Warm air rises through the center, carrying smoke with it, while cooler air enters gently near the base. This constant circulation helps prevent the buildup of carbon dioxide while maintaining warmth. In essence, the structure breathes for you. You shift slightly, noticing how this airflow affects your comfort. There's no stuffiness, no stale air, no suffocating heat that modern heaters sometimes produce. The warmth isn't oppressive. It's steady, circulating in a slow, reassuring rhythm. You realize this is one of those details that doesn't announce itself, yet without it, the night could feel suffocating rather than restful. Here's a quirky tidbit: some records suggest that the angle and tension of the smoke flaps were sometimes adjusted subtly during the night to optimize ventilation. Depending on wind direction, small changes, barely perceptible, but enough to maintain perfect air quality. You imagine a sleepy hand reaching up in the dark to nudge a flap ever so slightly, like a musician tuning an instrument mid-performance. Historians still argue whether these micro-adjustments were routine or only performed under extreme conditions. Some evidence suggests that highly experienced sleepers could predict airflow patterns based on the Tipi's location and the evening wind, needing minimal intervention. Others suggest vigilance was more constant, with small corrections made throughout the night. Either way, the goal was consistent, breathable air without heat loss. You notice how this gentle ventilation interacts with the fire and the hides. Warmth accumulates, smoke rises, cool air trickles in at the edges, and you're left in a stable environment. There's a certain elegance to it. No complex mechanisms, no moving parts beyond what nature and humans already provide. It's a balance that feels deliberate, even though it's entirely passive. Another subtle point: airflow isn't uniform inside the tipi. Near the base, air is slightly cooler, while the center remains warmer, especially around the fire. This gradient allows for flexible sleeping arrangements. Those who feel colder can adjust their position slightly, moving closer to the fire or layering more hides. It's a naturally dynamic environment. You shift slightly, considering how your modern bedroom compares. Central heating tries to mimic this effect but often overcompensates, cycling on and off. The Tipis airflow is quiescent and responsive to subtle changes without any digital input. You might laugh quietly at the thought of your thermostat trying to replicate centuries of passive design. Here's another quirky tidbit: some tribes reportedly preferred small openings at the top of the tipi, even during frigid nights, because it prevented condensation from forming inside. That means snow or frost didn't build up inside the structure, keeping bedding dry and reducing cold transfer. Dryness, after all, is just as important as warmth. Historians still argue whether the temperature gradient inside Tipis influenced sleeping positions. Some suggest that people deliberately chose spots based on microclimates within the tipi, placing children or elders where the air was slightly warmer. Others argue that arrangement was more about social convention than thermal optimization. Likely, both factors played a role. As the night stretches, you notice that the subtle movement of air creates a gentle, almost hypnotic rhythm. Your body begins sensing with it, inhaling and exhaling with the quiet circulation. The combination of ventilation, fire, hides, and shared warmth creates a holistic, multisensory system that modern designs rarely achieve naturally. And there, in the steady circulation of breathable, warm air, you feel a deep sense of contentment. Every element, from the fire to the hides to the carefully adjusted smoke flaps, is working in quiet harmony, guiding your body closer to restful sleep without effort. The tipi itself seems alive, breathing alongside you, steady and patient. Your attention slowly drifts to another subtle element that contributes to warmth: the orientation and structure of the tipi itself. It's not just a cone for aesthetic purposes or cultural symbolism. It's a finely tuned shape designed to withstand the elements while keeping sleepers cozy. You realize that the angle of the walls, the tension of the hides, and even the placement of the entrance all play roles in moderating heat and protecting against drafts. A mainstream historical fact emerges: many Tipis were intentionally oriented with the entrance facing east, greeting the morning sun, while also avoiding prevailing winter winds, which often came from the west or northwest on the plains. This dual purpose, spiritual symbolism and thermal practicality, demonstrates the clever integration of culture and survival. The structure itself becomes a passive guardian of comfort. You shift slightly, visualizing the shape. The conical walls deflect wind rather than allowing it to hit straight on, reducing cold penetration. Rain and snow slide off smoothly, preventing accumulation that could seep through layers or block the smoke hole. Even small shifts in the wind become manageable, not disruptive. It's engineering that feels natural and effortless. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some accounts suggest that the diameter of the Tipi's base was sometimes adjusted depending on the season. A wider base in winter allowed more bedding layers, helping trap heat, while a slightly narrower base in summer encouraged ventilation. You chuckle at the thought of ancient, seasonal resizing, a low-tech yet effective adaptation that the modern builders rarely consider. Historians still argue about how much these seasonal adjustments were standardized versus improvised. Some suggest they were part of oral tradition, taught through observation and experience. Others propose that adjustments were made ad hoc, depending on available materials and group size. Either way, the principle remains: shape and orientation matter more than most sleepers realize. The entrance is another critical factor. Often, a small flap could be closed tightly or left slightly open depending on weather, controlling the interaction of interior warmth with exterior air. The flap doesn't just admit humans, it's a regulator of drafts. Too wide and heat escapes; too tight and airflow stagnates. Precision, though subtle, was essential. You notice the psychological comfort this creates. Knowing the entrance is oriented correctly, flaps adjusted, and structure tension just so, you can relax more fully. Your mind recognizes order and predictability, signaling that the environment is under control even in a harsh, unpredictable night. There's a mental warmth to match the physical. Another subtle detailing: the structural poles themselves contribute to heat retention. Arranged carefully, they support the hides while creating channels for warm air to rise and circulate efficiently. The poles don't just hold the shelter, they guide airflow and stabilize interior temperatures. Everything is multifunctional, a principle you quietly admire. You imagine the Tipi swaying slightly in the wind outside, but inside the effect is negligible. The walls flex, absorbing force and preventing sudden drafts. It's a gentle interaction with nature, not a battle. You can almost hear the faint whisper of fabric adjusting, as if the shelter itself is breathing with you, accommodating the elements rather than resisting them. Historians still argue whether Tipi design evolved uniformly across tribes or varied greatly depending on region, available materials, and cultural preferences. Some evidence points to standardized dimensions and construction techniques in certain areas, while others indicate remarkable adaptability and improvisation. In practice, you sense that both consistency and flexibility ensured optimal comfort. You notice the interplay of shape, orientation, and insulation working together. The conical walls, layered hides, raised bedding, and carefully positioned entrance all form a cohesive system that protects against cold wind and moisture. Each detail is intentional, learned through centuries of observation and trial, refined quietly with every passing season. And there, lying inside the perfectly oriented, subtly engineered cone, you feel the cumulative effect of all these design choices. Every layer, every pole, every flap contributes to a sense of safety, warmth, and calm. You exhale slowly, allowing the structure's quiet intelligence to lull you further toward deep, restorative sleep, knowing that the night outside, however harsh, is now secondary to the harmony within. As you sink further into the warmth, another factor quietly asserts its importance: the role of body positioning. You might think that, with all the hides, fires, and raised platforms, how you lie down wouldn't matter much. But it does. Small adjustments, subtle bends, and curling just right can make a noticeable difference in conserving heat over hours of sleep. It's a principle as old as the practice itself. A mainstream historical factel: Native American sleepers often used the fetal or semi-fetal position during winter nights to minimize surface area exposed to cold air. This isn't about comfort in a modern, decorative sense, it's pure thermal strategy. Your body is a heat source, and minimizing exposed surface area preserves that heat, working in tandem with all the other layers around you. You shift slightly, instinctively curling one leg, feeling the insulation of hides compress and expand with your movement. Each slight repositioning maximizes warmth while maintaining comfort. You notice how natural it feels, almost like your body knows the rules even before your conscious mind does. It's subtle, unconscious optimization, honed by generations of practical knowledge. Here's a quirky tidbit: in some accounts, sleepers would rotate positions occasionally through the night, particularly if one side of the tipi felt slightly colder. This wasn't random tossing and turning. It was a micro-adjustment strategy, a gentle dance to maintain even warmth across the group. You can picture the quiet choreography, executed without disturbing others, like synchronized swimmers of thermal efficiency. Historians still argue whether these rotations were a conscious tactic or simply a result of restless sleep. Some evidence suggests deliberate shifting, particularly in larger family groups where heat distribution mattered. Others propose that the movement was largely instinctive. Either way, the end result is a balanced warmth that adapts naturally to both environment and company. You notice how the layering of hides interacts with positioning. Curling inward compresses air pockets within the bedding, concentrating warmth around your core. Extending arms or legs slightly can adjust localized comfort, letting your hands and feet find their ideal temperature. It's a subtle, ongoing feedback loop between body and environment. Another small but interesting detail: some tribes used small, rounded pillows made of grass or extra hides to support the neck and spine while maintaining thermal efficiency. These weren't decorative, they kept your head slightly elevated, preventing heat loss and aiding circulation. You can almost feel the difference, imagining the gentle pressure of a grass-filled support under your shoulders or head. There's a soft humor in how modern sleep advice sometimes mirrors these ancient practices: curl up for warmth, rotate if needed, elevate slightly. Only difference is that centuries ago, the lessons came from lived experience and observation, not sleep blogs or foam mattresses. You might chuckle quietly, imagining a modern human trying to sleep like this for the first time. Booted, layered, and curling like a cautious hedgehog. Historians still argue about how strict these positions were enforced or taught. Some evidence indicates that elders passed on advice about optimal sleeping positions for warmth. Others suggest that individuals discovered what worked best through personal experience. Likely, it was a combination of tradition and experimentation reinforced nightly. You shift again, finding the position that feels best. Shoulders relax. Hips sink just enough into layered hides. Hands and feet are comfortably warm. You notice that even the smallest adjustments now make noticeable differences, reinforcing the lesson that attention to detail and posture is as important as fire, hides, or clothing. Finally, there's the mental effect. Positioning isn't just physical. Being curled, slightly elevated, and carefully oriented signals security to your nervous system. The body interprets the environment as stable and safe, enhancing relaxation. Sleep comes easier when you feel both physically and psychologically secure. And there, in this carefully considered posture, surrounded by fire, hides, clothing, and the steady presence of others, you drift further into sleep. Every aspect of your position works with the environment to conserve heat, reduce energy expenditure, and encourage rest, a quiet testament to centuries of thoughtful, lived experience. As you drift further into the night, your awareness gently shifts to the subtler rhythms of the body itself. You notice your own breathing, slow and steady, and realize it's a crucial component in staying warm and comfortable. Each inhale brings in oxygen-rich air, each exhale releases just enough moisture and heat, maintaining an equilibrium inside the tipi that is barely perceptible but profoundly effective. A mainstream historical facting plains, tribes were attuned to the interaction between respiration, warmth, and air quality. Sleeping in layered clothing and hides, near fire but with good ventilation, ensured that moisture from exhalation didn't condense on bedding, which could cool you down. This balance of respiration, ventilation, and insulation was entirely intuitive but highly effective, a practice honed over generations. You shift slightly, feeling the warmth around your torso and extremities, noticing how breathing contributes to subtle circulation. Your lungs expand gently, pushing warm air into the surrounding layers, while the surrounding hides trap it close to your body. It's like an organic, micro-level heating system that requires no attention, yet performs consistently throughout the night. Here's a quirky tidbit: some accounts suggest that sleepers would occasionally exhale softly toward their hands or feet, using warm breath to supplement insulation during particularly frigid nights. It's a low-tech, intimate method of targeted warmth, demonstrating that even simple human actions were incorporated into survival strategies. You can't help but smile at the ingenuity of blowing on your own toes centuries before electric socks existed. Historians still argue whether such micro-strategies were widespread or rare improvisations. Some anthropologists suggest these techniques were culturally transmitted, taught from elders to children, while others propose they were purely instinctive responses to cold. Either way, they demonstrate an intimate awareness of body and environment that modern sleepers rarely experience. You notice how breathing is linked to the Tipi's ambient sounds, the gentle crackle of embers, the faint swish of flaps, the murmur of companions. Inhaling and exhaling in rhythm with these subtle noises creates a hypnotic effect, almost meditative. It's a natural ASMR, a soundscape that encourages deeper sleep without technology. Another subtle point: sleeping in close quarters with others actually enhances warmth via respiration. Each person releases heat and moisture into the immediate microclimate, creating a shared atmosphere that reduces individual energy expenditure. Your body's heat interacts with the warmth of neighbors, layering with the insulation of hides and clothing to maximize thermal efficiency. The communal environment is quietly synergistic. There's a gentle humor here. Modern humans often invest in heated blankets, space heaters, and elaborate mattresses to achieve what comes naturally through collective warmth and simple breaths. You might chuckle softly, imagining someone calculating the BTUs of a human cuddle puddle. Historians still argue whether proximity to others ever created negative consequences, like condensation or discomfort, that could offset thermal benefits. Evidence suggests that careful layering, positioning, and ventilation largely mitigated these risks, making communal sleeping both safe and practical. The body and environment are constantly negotiating. You shift slightly again, noticing how warmth flows from core to extremities, aided by the simple act of slow, steady breathing. The fire, hides, smoke flaps, and shared bodies provide the framework, but your own physiology fine-tunes it, continuously adjusting without conscious effort. You feel connected, not only to your immediate environment, but to generations of sleepers who understood these principles instinctively. Finally, the combination of careful respiration, insulation, and ambient awareness allows your muscles to release tension fully. Every breath reinforces comfort, calm, and security. You realize that sleep isn't a passive state here. It's the natural outcome of a carefully orchestrated system, each element working in quiet harmony. Your chest rises and falls, your body sinks deeper into warmth, and you glide further into restorative rest, guided by the subtle rhythm of life itself. By now, your consciousness drifts toward the role of the fire itself, a subtle but constant partner in maintaining warmth. You feel its gentle glow, the residual heat radiating in slow waves, and the quiet reassurance it provides. It's more than light. It's a regulator, a heartbeat of thermal stability within the Tipi. A mainstream historical fact: the central fire in Plains Tipis was carefully maintained, not blazing all night but smoldering steadily to provide consistent warmth. Fires were placed strategically to heat air that would rise and circulate, working in concert with the conical shape and smoke flaps. Too large, and it could overheat or consume valuable fuel; too small, and cold drafts would dominate. Balance was everything. You notice how the fire's placement interacts with your position. It isn't directly under your nose, nor is it distant enough to let cold pockets form. Its warmth radiates in concentric gradients, the hottest near the center and gently tapering toward the edges. You imagine the fire's caretakers checking embers, nudging logs, or adjusting placement earlier in the evening. Small, rhythmic movements that required no hurry but ensured comfort for hours. Here's a quirky tidbitting. Some accounts suggest that people occasionally placed heated stones near the fire or even slightly within the bedding area to store and radiate heat long after the flames had dimmed. Essentially, these stones acted as thermal batteries, slowly releasing warmth over the night. You smile at the thought of a glowing rock acting as an ancient radiator, quietly doing its job without complaining. Historians still argue whether heated stones were standard practice or an occasional improvisation for extreme cold. Evidence suggests that in colder regions or during harsh winters, they were likely more common, whereas in milder conditions, they were optional. Either way, the principle remains: objects can extend and stabilize warmth beyond what the fire alone provides. You notice how the fire interacts with ventilation and smoke flaps. The warm air rises, drawing in cooler air at the base in a continuous loop. This passive convection ensures even heat distribution while preventing smoke from overwhelming the interior. The system is simple, elegant, and effective, requiring no modern technology, yet it's highly sophisticated. Another subtle point: the fire's sound, soft crackling and occasional pops, contributes to the ambient ASMR-like environment. You notice how each tiny shift in embers punctuates the quiet, creating a rhythm that encourages relaxation. Your mind synchronizes with it, reinforcing sleepiness. Modern humans pay for white noise machines, but here, nature and fire provide it organically. There's a gentle humor in imagining someone trying to upgrade this system with modern gadgets, thermostats, space heaters, or electric blankets, while the original setup silently accomplishes the same goals with minimal intervention. It's quiet engineering, centuries ahead of its time in efficiency and simplicity. Historians still argue about how fire management practices varied between tribes or regions. Some suggest continuous maintenance was critical, with slight adjustments every hour. Others propose that once a steady ember bed was established, minimal intervention was needed. Both approaches reflect a deep understanding of materials, heat, and human needs. You shift slightly, feeling warmth radiate across your back and shoulders, noticing how it complements the insulation from hides and clothing. Fire heat and personal heat work together, filling gaps that air and fabric alone cannot. It's layered, synergistic, and almost invisible in its execution. Finally, the fire becomes part of the background, steady and constant, a reliable presence that reinforces safety and warmth. Your muscles relax, your breathing slows, and your awareness merges with the gentle hum of the environment. Every element, the fire, the hides, the bodies, the smoke flaps, and even your own breath, cooperates to maintain comfort. In this quiet equilibrium, sleep becomes not just possible, but inevitable. As your mind sinks deeper into the night, you become aware of the subtle role of temperature gradients inside the tipi. You might assume that warmth is uniform across the interior, but in reality, the environment is layered, nuanced, and carefully managed. The air near the center is slightly warmer, while pockets near the edges or closer to flaps are cooler. This gentle gradient allows for fine adjustments in your positioning, clothing, or bedding to maintain comfort without disturbing others. A mainstream historical fact, you Native American sleepers understood these microclimates intuitively. Observing subtle changes in airflow, ambient temperature, and fire behavior, they adapted sleeping positions, layering, and clothing choices to match specific zones within the teepee. In effect, the interior becomes a softly calibrated thermal map, guiding where and how you rest. You notice how these gradients affect your extremities. Hands and feet might feel slightly cooler, encouraging small adjustments. Curling toes, pulling arms closer to your body, or moving slightly toward the fire or another source of warmth. Each minor shift is a natural response to subtle environmental cues, not a conscious decision. Your body becomes a participant in an ongoing conversation with the space around you. Here's a quirky tidbit in some accounts. The corners near the entrance or walls were considered transition zones, slightly cooler spots where sleepers could place objects, shoes, or even pets without impacting the shared warmth of the central area. It's an early form of spatial zoning that balances human comfort with practical needs. You can't help but smile at the ingenuity. It's like zoning laws for heat. Historians still argue whether awareness of these thermal zones was taught explicitly or simply absorbed through experience. Some anthropologists suggest that children learned by observation, noticing how elders or siblings shifted subtly. Others propose that the practice was so ingrained in daily life that it became second nature without formal instruction. Either way, the effect is consistent. Heat is optimized, effort minimized. You shift slightly, testing the boundary between warmer and cooler zones. It's subtle, almost imperceptible, yet enough to maintain overall comfort. The combination of airflow, insulation, fire, and positioning creates a living system that responds dynamically, rather than passively, to changing conditions throughout the night. Another subtle point, these gradients also help conserve fuel. By understanding which areas naturally retain heat and which require reinforcement, firewood consumption could be minimized, maintaining warmth efficiently over long nights. It's a quiet example of energy conservation long before modern sustainability concepts emerged. There's a gentle humor in imagining a modern human measuring these gradients with a digital thermometer, only to discover that ancient sleepers already mastered it without instruments. No apps, no charts, just lived experience. Your mind drifts with amusement, further easing you toward relaxation. Historians still argue whether these thermal gradients were more critical in extreme winters versus milder seasons. Some evidence suggests they played a pivotal role in regions with harsh, prolonged cold, while in temperate seasons, they were more incidental. Either way, they shape behavior, movement, and comfort throughout the night. Finally, you notice how the interplay of heat zones, fire, hides, clothing, and bodies creates a multi-layered, adaptable environment. You are enveloped in warmth that feels both natural and responsive, and your mind recognizes the subtle intelligence embedded in the design. With each breath, you sink further, cradled by an intricate, centuries-old balance of air, insulation, and human instinct. By now, your awareness drifts toward moisture, an often overlooked factor in sleep comfort. You might not think much about it, but even in cold weather, moisture, whether from breath, sweat, or environmental humidity, can quickly compromise warmth. In the Tipi, careful attention to dryness was as crucial as insulation or fire, because wet hides or bedding can sap body heat in minutes. A mainstream historical fact: Native American sleepers often arranged bedding and clothing to manage moisture effectively. Layering hides, using elevated platforms, and ensuring airflow all helped reduce dampness from breath or snow that might enter the Tipi. Dryness wasn't a luxury. It was a vital aspect of survival. Wet hides equal cold nights, while dry layers equal comfort that feels effortless. You notice how your own breath contributes to subtle humidity near your face and torso. The ventilation from smoke flaps, combined with the conical design, gently channels moisture upward and out, preventing condensation on the hides. It's an elegant system, quietly keeping you dry without any conscious effort. You can feel the difference between air that moves and air that stagnates. It's remarkable how small shifts can change comfort levels. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some accounts mention that small patches of absorbent grasses or feathers were occasionally placed under the bedding or near sleepers to catch excess moisture. Essentially, these served as primitive moisture wicking systems. You smile at the image of someone layering straw under their hides, silently improving sleep quality, centuries before modern fabrics made this standard. Historians still argue whether moisture management was universally practiced or varied between tribes and regions. Some evidence suggests that in areas prone to heavy snow or damp winters, moisture control was critical, while in arid regions it was less of a concern. Either way, the principle remains. Keeping bedding dry is central to comfort and survival. You notice how the combination of ventilation, bedding, and positioning works in synergy. Your body heat interacts with dry hides, insulated layers, and rising warm air to maintain equilibrium. Moisture is managed subtly, almost invisibly, reinforcing the overall effectiveness of the environment. You feel grateful for this quiet intelligence built into the Tipis design. Another subtle pointing: dryness also helps with hygiene. Bedding and hides that remain dry are less likely to foster odors or microbial growth, which in turn contributes to a psychologically calming sleep environment. Smell is underrated in comfort, and here it plays a gentle but important role. There's a small humorous thought: you've probably complained about a slightly damp mattress or pillow, but ancient sleepers treated moisture management as a nightly survival priority. They weren't just finicky, they were efficient. You might chuckle softly at the idea of someone meticulously adjusting grasses under their sleeping spot in sub-zero weather. Historians still argue whether moisture management strategies influenced sleeping arrangements more than warmth alone. Some suggest that slightly elevated positions and layered hides were primarily for insulation, with dryness being a fortunate side effect. Others contend that moisture control was equally crucial, especially in extreme climates. The reality is likely a combination. Everything worked together to create optimal sleep conditions. Finally, you notice how the careful management of moisture, heat, and air circulation reinforces each other. The environment is dry, comfortable, and responsive, allowing your muscles to release tension, your breathing to deepen, and your mind to sink into the gentle rhythm of the night. You feel cocooned in warmth and dryness, a quiet but profound luxury that guides you closer to restorative sleep. As you sink further into sleep, your mind drifts toward the subtle role of natural scents in the Tipi. You might not consciously notice them, but smell plays a surprisingly important in creating a sense of comfort and safety. The combination of burning wood, tanned hides, and the earthy aroma of the ground creates an olfactory environment that is soothing, familiar, and inherently relaxing. A mainstream historical fact: Plains tribe understood the value of these natural scents, even if they didn't articulate it scientifically. The aroma of the fire, combined with the gentle fragrance of cured hides and clean bedding materials, helped signal the end of the day and prepare the mind for rest. It's a subtle cue, reinforcing security, warmth, and relaxation, all without conscious thought. You inhale slowly, noticing how the scents interact. Smoke isn't overpowering, it's diffused by ventilation and the structure of the Tipi. Hides release a faint, musky warmth, and the earth beneath adds a grounding note. The combination creates a multisensory experience: warmth, sound, and now smell all work in quiet harmony to ease the body and mind towards sleep. Here's a quirky tidbit: in some accounts, small bundles of aromatic herbs, like sage or sweetgrass, were occasionally placed near sleepers. These were not just for ritual or cultural symbolism, they also subtly masked any unpleasant odors and may had mild antiseptic properties. You imagine someone tucking a fragrant bundle near the edge of a sleeping platform, adding an invisible layer of comfort to an already carefully curated environment. Historians still argue how widely these scent-based practices were used and whether their primary purpose was practical or ceremonial. Some evidence suggests that even in tribes without explicit herbal traditions, the natural smells of hides and fire alone were sufficient to create a comforting environment. Others propose that aromatic plants were deliberate enhancements, an early form of environmental mood control. Either way, the effect is noticeable. You shift slightly, you noticing how these aromas interact with other environmental factors. Warmth, moisture, and airflow influence scent distribution. The rising heat from the fire carries subtle notes through the tipi, ensuring that the environment feels consistent and enveloping. There's no abrupt intrusion, just a slow, comforting diffusion that enhances calm. Another subtle point, scent also contributes to a sense of security. Familiar smells indicate that the space is safe, inhabited by known people and maintained with care. Your body relaxes in response, letting go of tension. Modern humans often underestimate this effect, relying instead on artificial air fresheners or perfumed products, missing the intuitive calming power of natural odors. There's a gentle humor here. You could probably buy dozens of scented candles and diffusers to mimic this experience, yet centuries of empirical knowledge created a natural, self-sustaining version that works perfectly with no expense. Nature, it seems, had perfected the sensory environment for sleep long before modern convenience. Historians still argue whether scent-based comfort was more significant than thermal or auditory factors in promoting sleep. Some suggest the effect is largely psychological, subtly reassuring the mind. Others propose that familiarity with environmental odors also aids physiological relaxation. You sense that both are true. Smell is quietly entwined with every other layer of comfort in the tipi. Finally, as the combined warmth, ventilation, moisture management, shared presence, and gentle aromas surround you, your body begins to surrender fully to the night. The senses collaborate seamlessly like fire, and hides provide heat. Smoke flaps manage airflow, raised platforms lift you from cold, and scents reassure your mind. Each detail contributes to an effortless transition into restorative, deep sleep, a living lesson in practical, multisensory design. As the night deepens further, your awareness drifts toward the quiet role of texture and comfort and warmth. You probably don't give it much thought in your modern bedroom, but the feel of materials against skin plays a subtle and significant role in how easily you drift into sleep. Every layer, hide fur, woven grass mat, or simple blanket, offers a tactile cue that affects relaxation and thermal efficiency. A mainstream historical fact: Native American sleepers selected and layered hides, furs, and mats with careful attention to softness, flexibility, and insulating qualities. The underlayers might be slightly coarser, providing insulation and support, while the top layers were softer and more pliable, directly contacting skin or sleepwear. Comfort and survival were inseparable. You didn't sacrifice one for the other. You run your imagination across these textures, feeling the gentle friction and yielding softness as you shift slightly. Every movement interacts with the layers, creating a small, responsive microenvironment. Even a subtle wrinkle in a hide or the slight spring of compressed fur affects warmth and comfort. You notice how your body naturally nestles into these layers, adjusting minutely to optimize contact without conscious thought. It's a tactile dialogue. Your skin signals temperature and pressure, and the bedding responds accordingly, smoothing, cushioning, and insulating as needed. You feel cocooned, supported, and surprisingly secure, as though the materials themselves understand your needs. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some accounts suggest that sleepers occasionally rearranged hides midnight to create softer pockets for feet or elbows, almost like bespoke padding. It's subtle, practical, and slightly whimsical. Imagine gently fluffing a fur in the dark to keep your toes cozy, centuries before memory foam. You can't help but smile at the universality of this small comfort. Historians still argue whether this tactile attention was an intentional ritual or simply instinctive. Some evidence suggests that elders taught younger members how to layer and arrange hides for optimal tactile comfort. Others propose that it evolved naturally through repeated experience and trial and error. Either way, the result is an environment finely tuned to body and touch. You notice how textures interact with temperature management. Soft, pliable hides trap air efficiently, while coarse underlayers prevent slipping and maintain insulating pockets. Your body heat gently warms these layers, which in turn reflect warmth back to you. It's a continuous feedback loop: body, material, and environment working in quiet synchronization. Another subtle detail: tactile comfort also contributes to psychological relaxation. Knowing that you're lying on familiar, soft, and reliable surfaces signal security to your nervous system, which encourages slower heart rates, deeper breathing, and the gradual onset of restorative sleep. Modern sleep science confirms that tactile sensation is intimately linked to sleep quality, yet here it has been perfected without technology. There's a soft humor in imagining someone trying to replicate this in a modern bed. Memory foam, heated blankets, and mattress toppers all try to emulate what hides, furs, and mats accomplish naturally. Centuries of experience beat commercial marketing with a quiet, unassuming elegance. Historians still debate how much tactile layering influenced sleep patterns compared with fire, clothing, and positioning. Some argue it was critical, especially in extreme cold, while others suggest it primarily enhanced comfort once other survival needs were met. Likely, the effect was cumulative and every layer mattered, physically and psychologically. Finally, you shift gently, appreciating how each texture supports the next, creating a cohesive, responsive sleep environment. The layers, along with shared body warmth, ventilation, fire, and careful positioning, create a tactile cocoon that envelopes and reassures. Every sensation, from soft fur to firm hide, contributes to a harmonious night. You exhale slowly, letting your mind and body merge with a quiet rhythm of warmth, structure, and texture, further drifting into a calm, restorative sleep. As the night stretches on, your awareness drifts to the subtle role of gentle movement in maintaining warmth and comfort. Even when you're fully cocooned in hides and blankets, tiny shifts, turning a shoulder, curling a leg, adjusting an arm, help regulate temperature, prevent stiffness, and preserve circulation. Sleep here isn't about rigid stillness. It's a quiet, flowing interaction with the environment. A mainstream historical factic plains tribes instinctively adjusted their positions throughout the night. Curling into a semi-fetal position or shifting slightly toward warmer areas allowed body heat to be conserved efficiently. Small, natural movements complemented the insulation of layered hides, and the warmth of nearby sleepers and the radiant heat of the fire, forming a responsive system for comfort. You notice the way your own body subtly rotates, almost without thought, to maintain optimal warmth. Each movement nudges air pockets in bedding, redistributes insulation, and prevents cold spots from forming. It's a silent dialogue between body and environment, honed over generations of trial and observation. You imagine ancestors performing the same careful micro-adjustments, their movements blending seamlessly with the rhythm of the night. Here's a quirky tidbit: some accounts suggest that sleepers would occasionally use these shifts to tuck a hide back under a hip or smooth a layer of bedding that had slipped. These small corrections were made without disturbing anyone else, like an invisible, cooperative choreography of comfort. You can almost picture a half-asleep person adjusting their sleeping nest like a delicate puzzle piece. Historians still argue whether these movements were consciously taught or emerged instinctively. Some evidence indicates that elders shared techniques for optimizing sleep positions and micro-adjustments, while other sources suggest that experience alone shaped the practice. Either way, the result is consistent movement preserves comfort. You notice how these shifts interact with tactile and thermal layers. Hides, furs, fire, and proximity to companions. Each adjustment balances temperature and comfort naturally, reinforcing a deep sense of relaxation. Your body responds instinctively, and your mind begins to sync with the quiet rhythm of the environment. There's gentle humor in imagining a modern sleeper trying to mimic this with rigid positions or sleep trackers. Here, centuries of observation allow subtle micro-movements to achieve what technology attempts to force artificially. The result is effortless, dynamic rest, perfectly attuned to the night. Finally, as your body shifts slightly once more, warmth redistributes, comfort is maintained, and you sink further into restorative sleep. Every small motion, unnoticed yet deliberate, nuances the harmony of fire, insulation, airflow, and shared warmth. You feel fully cradled, relaxed, and at peace, drifting further into the gentle rhythm of the night. As you drift deeper into sleep, your mind begins to notice the role of companionship and shared warmth. You might not actively think about it, but the presence of others sleeping nearby subtly enhances your comfort. Body heat radiates across the shared space, creating a microclimate that reduces energy expenditure and increases overall warmth. In the cold, this communal aspect is as practical as it is reassuring. A mainstream historical fact: plains tribes often slept in groups within a single tipi, especially during winter. Family members, or even small extended networks, would nestle close together, their bodies creating a distributed heat source. You can imagine the warmth radiating from each body, weaving together with fires, hides, and clothing to form a comprehensive thermal ecosystem. You shift slightly, sensing how shared warmth complements your own insulation. It's not crowded in an uncomfortable way, it's an intentional design, balancing space and proximity. The heat from another person's body reaches you gradually, filling small gaps and enhancing your own comfort. You realize that communal sleep was as much about survival as it was about social cohesion. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some accounts suggest that sleepers would alternate positions slightly throughout the night, ensuring that no one got too cold or too hot. This wasn't just practicality. It was a subtle form of shared responsibility, with everyone unconsciously contributing to the comfort of the group. You might smile at the mental image of a quiet, cooperative, body heat rotation. Historians still argue whether the practice of communal sleeping was dictated purely by necessity or whether cultural norms reinforced it. Some suggest it was mainly survival-driven, especially in extreme winter conditions, while others propose that group sleep also strengthened bonds, encouraged storytelling, and created a sense of security. Likely both factors played a role. You notice how shared warmth interacts with ventilation and fire. Even with multiple bodies, smoke and airflow remain balanced, allowing breathable air to circulate while retaining heat. The design of the tipi, with smoke flaps and careful layering, ensures that comfort is not compromised by occupancy. It's a quiet demonstration of practical social engineering. Another subtle point: proximity to others also influences psychological relaxation. Hearing the gentle breathing of companions, sensing the small shifts of nearby bodies, and feeling the collective warmth signals safety. Your nervous system interprets this as security, allowing muscles to release tension and sleep to deepen. Modern solo sleepers often miss this reassuring feedback. There's gentle humor in imagining someone used to a king-size bed, trying to replicate this communal arrangement with blankets, pillows, and socially acceptable spacing. Centuries of experience accomplish what no mattress had can, promising efficient warmth, comfort, and subtle cooperation. Historians still debate the exact sleeping arrangements, who slept next to whom, how elders or children were positioned. But the principle remains clear: shared warmth, careful layering, and strategic positioning combined to create an environment where every participant contributed to collective comfort and survival. Finally, as your body nestles alongside others, you feel a profound sense of connectedness and warmth. Each heartbeat, each small shift, and each exhaled breath contributes to the collective microclimate. The fire, insulation, ventilation, and shared bodies form a seamless network of support. You relax fully, feeling the harmony of communal warmth, and drift even deeper into restorative, uninterrupted sleep. By now, your awareness gently drifts toward the cyclical patterns of night itself and how they influence sleep. You notice subtle changes in temperature, the quiet flicker of embers, and the rhythm of the wind outside. Even in darkness, the tipi is not static. It interacts continuously with the environment, and your body senses these shifts, adapting in a low-key, almost imperceptible way. A mainstream historical fact: Plains tribes observed nightly temperature fluctuations carefully, often arranging bedding, hides, and positioning to accommodate predicted drops or increases. People learned to anticipate the coldest hours, placing extra layers nearby or tucking closer to the fire during the pre-dawn chill. Sleep was dynamic, responsive, and subtly guided by environmental cues. You shift slightly, feeling how the conical structure of the tipi softens these changes. Air moves gradually, flaps adjust, and the fire radiates heat evenly. You realize that centuries of experience created a microclimate that is forgiving, absorbing small environmental variations without disrupting sleep. It's a quietly intelligent system. Here's a quirky tidbit: some accounts mention that the timing of sleep cycles was loosely attuned to natural rhythms, such as moonlight, wind patterns, or animal sounds. While not formalized like a modern circadian schedule, these cues subtly guided wakefulness and rest, providing natural markers in the night. You imagine a soft, lunar-inspired rhythm guiding your body through darkness. Historians still argue whether these natural cycles were consciously followed or merely absorbed unconsciously. Some evidence suggests that elders and hunters actively timed rest periods around environmental cues, while others propose that human bodies simply adapted instinctively. Either way, the result is a seamless blend of body and environment, preparing for morning without effort. You notice how minor nighttime awakenings, stirring to adjust a hide, shift a limb, or reposition slightly, are integrated smoothly into this rhythm. Each movement preserves warmth, accommodates companions, and responds to environmental shifts, ensuring that sleep remains largely uninterrupted. It's an elegant orchestration of small adjustments. Another subtle pointing: the interplay of light and darkness within the tipi affects comfort and mental ease. The soft glow of embers diminishes gradually, avoiding abrupt brightness, while the surrounding darkness is softened by the reflective hides. This balance soothes the nervous system, supporting gradual descent into deep sleep. Modern night lights often disrupt this rhythm, but here, illumination is perfectly calibrated. There's gentle humor in imagining someone trying to mimic this natural orchestration with alarms, night lights, and electric heaters. Centuries of observation and experience achieved what modern gadgets attempt with complexity and expense: automatic, seamless adaptation to environmental rhythms. Historians still argue how much these natural cycles in total sleep duration versus simply enhancing comfort. Some argue that awareness of moon phases and wind patterns subtly regulated nightly rest, while others suggest their effect was secondary to insulation, fire, and communal warmth. Likely, both influenced sleep patterns. Finally, as you lie fully cocooned in warmth, layered hides, shared bodies, and gentle airflow, the subtle shifts of night and the quiet responsiveness of your environment lull you further. The fire's embers, soft ventilation, gentle sounds, and tactile comfort all merge with natural rhythms, guiding your body seamlessly toward the restorative, deep, and uninterrupted sleep that has carried generations through cold plains nights. As the night approaches its final hours, you sink fully into the rhythm of the Tipi. Every element, fire, hides, ventilation, shared warmth, tactile layering scents, and micro adjustments, has harmonized to create a perfect cocoon. You feel entirely supported, as if centuries of observation, experience, and wisdom have conspired to make this night effortless. Your body and mind have learned the quiet art of resting in sync with nature, a skill refined over generations. A mainstream historical facting: by the pre-dawn hours, the body is often at its coldest. Yet sleepers in Tipis remained largely insulated from these extreme drops. Layers of hides, body heat from companions, and residual warmth from embers created a consistent internal temperature. Even small adjustments, like curling slightly or drawing in a limb, were sufficient to preserve comfort without conscious effort. You notice the subtle interactions of air and heat in the stillness. Rising warmth from smoldering embers mingles with slowly circulating cool air, maintaining balance. The smoke flaps, adjusted during the evening, continue to regulate airflow delicately. This gentle circulation prevents condensation, avoids cold drafts, and ensures breathable air. Even as your consciousness fades, the Tipi maintains its silent vigil. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some elders reported that by the end of the night, the very structure of the Tipi, the tension of the poles and the layering of hides, created a faint hum or vibration when the wind moved over it. It's a subtle, almost imperceptible resonance, like the shelter itself is breathing with you. Imagine lying there cocooned as the Tipi hums its quiet lullaby. Historians still argue whether this hum was universally experienced or anecdotal, but the idea fits neatly with the overall harmony of design. Every component is active in ensuring comfort and sleep, including the structure itself. You feel the weight of shared warmth around you, the presence of companions subtly reassuring, each breath contributing to the collective microclimate. Your position, small movements, and the natural rhythm of your breathing all work in tandem with the environment. The Tipi is not passive, it is a responsive, living system that adapts silently to each occupant's needs. Another subtle point in the final hours of night are when these systems are most critical. Heat retention, insulation, ventilation, and moisture control have been in continuous operation, and small failures would be noticeable now. Yet the structure, your positioning, and the careful attention of past generations combine to ensure uninterrupted rest. It's a marvel of passive design and learned behavior. There's gentle humor in imagining someone trying to replicate this modernly: layers, micro adjustments, shared warmth, controlled airflow, all meticulously managed without modern gadgets. Centuries of empirical wisdom surpass contemporary complexity, quietly, efficiently, and without fanfare. Historians still debate whether these final pre-dawn hours were the most restorative, but the evidence suggests that the culmination of environmental control, tactile comfort, and body positioning allowed for deep, uninterrupted rest. Sleep was a skill, but it was also a gift of careful design. Finally, as the first hints of morning approach and the embers glow faintly, you remain cocooned in warmth, texture, scent, and sound. Every subtle element continues to work together, carrying you toward the natural end of night. You are enveloped in centuries of wisdom, wrapped in the quiet, gentle lull of survival, comfort, and harmony. The first light of morning has not yet broken, and the world outside the Tipi is still quiet, wrapped in soft shadows and the gentle hush of pre-dawn. Inside you lie cocooned, warm, and undisturbed, feeling the slow rhythm of your own breath, the faint pulse of shared bodies nearby, and the lingering heat from embers that burn gently through the night. Every element, from the carefully layered hides to the subtle sway of poles in the wind, contributes to a sense of effortless safety. You notice how the environment has quietly guided you, From the sound of the fire crackling to the slight movement of air through the smoke flaps, to the comforting texture of heights beneath and around you. Each sensory cue has worked in harmony, creating a continuous, unbroken thread of comfort that has cradled you through darkness. The tactile sensations, scents, subtle vibrations, and shared warmth have intertwined, reminding you that rest is not only physical, it is profoundly multisensory. There's a slow, soothing rhythm to this final stretch of sleep, as if the Tipi itself continues to breathe alongside you. No sudden changes, no harsh noises, just a gentle, deliberate orchestration of heat air, an environment that fades gradually as night yields to morning. Your muscles release tension fully, your mind drifts peacefully, and every sensation seems designed to reassure, calm, and lull. In this quiet conclusion, you can almost feel the accumulated knowledge of countless generations wrapped around you, the invisible lessons of survival, comfort, and observation guiding each heartbeat and breath. The warmth, safety, and stillness of the night remain with you, softening as daylight approaches, leaving only the lingering sense of serenity and calm. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let yourself drift fully, carried by the gentle wisdom of the night.